Hey Kids on the Ridge, Pastor Stephen here. We're going to continue on the story of Joseph today and find out what God's big plan was for him. I know that he probably had the worst day you could possibly ever imagine, but you know what's so cool is God can take the worst in something and turn it into the best. Let's see what happens with Joseph.
This is the rest of the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph had a big problem. One day he was living in a house where he was the favorite son. Then the next day, he was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. But Joseph's situation was about to go from bad to worse. Well, actually from bad to not so bad to worse. The slave traders took Joseph to Egypt, where he was sold to a man by the name of Potiphar. In Potiphar's house, Joseph started off as a normal slave. But Joseph was such a good worker that Potiphar soon put Joseph in charge of his entire house. So, even though he was a slave, things were starting to look up. And then she came along. One day, when Potiphar wasn't around, his wife tried to get Joseph to do things with her that were wrong. But Joseph refused, and this made Potiphar's wife mad. Like, really mad. So mad that she got him thrown into prison. First the pit, now this? Joseph's getting thrown into a lot of things. But even in jail, God took care of Joseph. Soon the guards saw the same thing in him that Potiphar did, and they put Joseph in charge of the whole jail. So if Joseph was in jail, and he was put in charge of the jail, why didn't he let himself out of jail? Anyway, when he was in jail, two of Joseph's friends had dreams that they told him about. Remember how Joseph can interpret dreams? Well, that's what he did for his friends. It was good news for the king's servant. His dream meant that he was going to be freed, but not so much for the baker. He was going to be killed. What could a baker possibly do to deserve to be put to death? Did he burn the king's birthday cake or something? Anyway, everything that Joseph said would happen actually happened. His friend, the king's servant, was soon out of prison and back serving the king. And the baker, well, let's just say he baked his last cake. Then one day, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, started having some strange dreams himself. In the dream, there were 7 big, fat, healthy cows and 7 skinny, sickly cows. The 7 skinny cows ate the 7 fat cows. Why is everyone having such weird dreams? This dream was troubling Pharaoh, and no one could tell him what it meant. But the king's servant remembered Joseph's gift. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph to interpret his dream. Could work out great for Joseph, or it could be a disaster. Remember what happened to the baker? But God was with Joseph, and he showed him what the Pharaoh's dream meant. The 7 fat cows represented 7 years of really good crops. But after that, there was going to be 7 years of famine, where food was really hard to find. Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he put Joseph in charge of all of the food in Egypt. And Joseph came up with a plan so that everyone could have enough food for the coming famine. Then, one day, Joseph's brothers showed up in Egypt to ask for help. They were going through a famine too, and they needed food to survive. Joseph recognized them right away, but they did not recognize him. When Joseph saw his brothers bowing down before him, he knew that he finally had a chance to get revenge on the very people who sold him as a slave. But instead, Joseph forgave his brothers. He invited them all to come live with him in Egypt. God took care of Joseph and used him to save his whole family. Even when things were at their worst, God still had a plan and a purpose for Joseph's life. The end.
This is a great story that reminds us that when even things are going bad, when things could all seem wrong in our world and we're mad, we're like, God, why is this happening? God has a plan. He has got a destiny and a future for us that's probably bigger than anything we can possibly imagine. And if we trust in Him, if we say, okay, God, not my will, but your will be done, we can see the plan come to action and be amazed at what God is doing in our lives. I hope you guys can remember this with me as we go through the different Corona stuff, different things. I miss you, Kids on the Ridge, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Kids on the Ridge.